Just because it looks like someone's a few steps further than you on their path doesn't mean you should worship them, doesn't mean they're a god, it doesn't mean you should just follow them blindly. It just means that maybe they're a little further along, and maybe they're not. And as you get further along on your own path, you'll find teachers and guides who are great for you, the ones that can really, really help you. But in my opinion, a teacher cannot give you the answers. They just can't. At best, what a teacher can do is give you tools and a framework, a new lens for you to look through that will ideally reveal the answers that are already inside of you. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Highly Spiritual Person podcast. I wanted to do a quick solo cast this week because I've been sitting on this episode for so long. I've wanted to talk about this topic for such a long time, but I've just struggled to phrase it in a way that would be helpful without being like alarmist, because I don't want to scare anybody, but I do want to talk about this because I think it's an important topic. So, when I say in the title that being a spiritual seeker can be dangerous, it's not because being a spiritual seeker is bad or wrong or anything like that. I love being a spiritual seeker. I love asking the big questions. I love the mystery. I love mysticism. I love talking to people about their journey and how their beliefs have evolved. I love all of that. But I think there's just a ton of pitfalls that spiritual seekers can fall into. And I'm speaking from experience because I've fallen into them and I've had these issues. So I'm just going to get into them. I think there's a few main ones that we should talk about today, a few main blocks, and how you can get around them, especially if all of this is new to you. So the biggest one for me is isolation. That's the first one. If you're a spiritual seeker, especially if you're someone who's coming from a religion, then you probably had a religious community before, like a church or a temple, something like that. When you leave that, it might feel like you don't have anybody anymore. And maybe in the beginning that's true. You're out on your own, you might be alone for a while, but that's not forever. Even as a spiritual seeker, there's community. You can find connections. I found so many great friends and so many great connections once I got on this path. And that can happen unless you continue to isolate yourself. And isolation can happen for a lot of reasons. Like I said, you might feel like you have to hide. Maybe you feel like it's not safe yet for you to express your doubts or your new beliefs. This could be because of your family or the community, the larger community that you're in. Maybe you're afraid to be your true self. But here's the thing. When you feel like you have to hide, or if you feel like you can't be your true self, then you're never going to be able to build a support system or find people who are, right for you. And just in generally speaking, isolation just isn't good for any of us. It can lead to loneliness, it leads to depression. You need a support system. And having a support system is good, not just so you're not lonely and depressed, but also to keep you safer. And why do I say that? Because there are people who prey on spiritual seekers who are isolated and fearful. Let me say that one more time. There are people who prey on spiritual seekers who are isolated and fearful. Which brings me to number 2, which is grifters and frauds. So to be fair, there are a lot of spiritual people and spiritual communities that are completely benign. Probably most of them, honestly. And, as you get deeper into your spiritual awakening, if that's what you want to call it, or at least deeper into questioning and exploring, you'll find this. There's lots of people who are completely benign, completely fine. You'll, maybe interact with them a little bit and, maybe they'll become friends or, people that you kind of run into here and there. But if you're someone who has questions and has this calling to look for meaning, if you're a spiritual seeker, a spiritual misfit, whatever you want to call yourself, there are just some people who are waiting to take advantage of that. And this can look like someone who wants you to be dependent on them in some way. These can be people who want you to kind of worship them like a god, or cult leaders, high control groups. That's clearly the most dangerous example. And I think we know kind of what that looks like. But there's also people who just have wildly outrageously priced offerings. For instance, I met a psychic and an energy healer way early on in my spiritual journey, years and years ago, who charged a normal amount for a reading, maybe $40 or something like that. And it was a really good reading. It was accurate. I enjoyed it. And then later, she offered to align all of my chakras for $3,000. I did not pay her $3,000. I didn't want her anywhere near my chakras. I blocked her number because I knew that was ridiculous. First of all, the vague offer of aligning my chakras, the outrageous price of $3,000, not for me. What I'm trying to say is there are people out there who will give you just enough spiritual wisdom or demonstrate just enough of a spiritual gift to try to get you to be dependent on them. Just because someone's spiritual doesn't mean that they're good. Just because someone is tapped in or has a spiritual gift or has some kind of spiritual wisdom doesn't mean that there's someone you need to be in community with. We all have spiritual gifts. We are all spiritual in our own way. That's just how it is. Just because it looks like someone's a few steps further than you on their path doesn't mean you should worship them, doesn't mean they're a god. It doesn't mean you should just follow them blindly. It just means that maybe they're a little further along, and maybe they're not. And as you get further along on your own path, you'll find teachers and guides who are great for you, the ones that can really, really help you. But in my opinion, a teacher cannot give you the answers. They just can't. At best, what a teacher can do is give you tools and a framework, a new lens for you to look through that will ideally reveal the answers that are already inside of you. They can provide you with sacred texts, holy books, philosophies, perspectives, which can all be helpful. They can provide you with ideas and stories, legends, mythology, which again can all be helpful. They can be a guide. And if they're really good, if they're really, really, really good, they can ask you the right questions to help you find your path and your truth. Because again, they're there to help you find the answers that are within you, not outside of you, within you. And if they're in a human body, which I'm assuming they are, they can't give you ultimate truth. Because we as humans are limited. None of us have all the answers. And I think the best way to prevent this happening, this kind of being, taken and used by frauds and grifters and whatnot, is developing a skill, which is number 3, discernment. Lack of discernment on the spiritual path, that to me is very, very dangerous. If you can take anything from this episode, I would take that. Discernment is probably the most important skill and sense that you can cultivate. And what I mean by discernment is being able to sense whether something is right or wrong for you. For you. That's the most important part of this. Why do I emphasize the for you part? There are a lot of things that we can probably agree on are universally bad or universally good. When you're on this journey, you'll encounter lots of different perspectives, different ideas, and most of them won't jump out at you as immediately good or bad. What's required is pausing and discerning if it's right for you specifically and checking for internal resonance. Just because an idea is good doesn't mean it's the best for you. There's a lot of really great spiritual perspectives. You'll find this. But being a spiritual seeker is about finding the best ones for you that help you further your journey and your awakening and come home to yourself. If you encounter a new idea that interests you, don't just blindly adopt it as part of your belief system. Use some discernment, pause, play with the idea, check if it resonates inside of you. And if you're struggling with discernment, you may just need to practice, or you may have this other block in the way, which was probably my biggest issue, which was religious programming. Early on in my spiritual awakening, I didn't even realize that I was still operating from my religious trauma and my religious programming. For instance, I didn't know that I was allowed to visit the local Buddhist temple, as an example, and not become a Buddhist. I didn't know I was allowed to visit the Catholic church down the street and not become a Catholic. I was viewing spirituality through this very specific Christian lens that I was given as a child that said that the whole goal of any interaction with a religion is conversion. If you grew up in Christianity like me, you know that converting non believers was considered a goal. So I was walking around as a seeker with this unconscious, subconscious belief that if I felt drawn to a certain religion, that meant I needed to become a member. And then I would embed myself in this new belief system, into this new religion, only to later realize, like, oops, this is not for me in the long run. So, because I was still operating from my religious trauma, I was just running from one community to the other and continuing to act out the trauma I experienced when I was younger and not understanding why it wasn't working out. The problem for me was that limiting belief and that religious programming running in the background that I didn't realize I had, that was saying, if you walk through those doors, you have to stay there forever, which just isn't true. I wasn't pausing and testing to see if this new religion or this new teaching resonated fully for me. I was just like, oh, wow, this must be the thing I was looking for. And I would just dive in and get all tangled up in it and then walk away hurt again and disappointed. You have to recognize whatever those programs are, whatever that trauma is for you personally as you get started on this new path. And it'll be different for every single person. It'll be different for you than it is for me, probably. Because even if our past experiences are similar, they're never exactly the same. So your task is to do the healing, heal your own religious trauma, remove those old programs so they don't trip you up and prevent you from really being able to enjoy this journey. So once you've done the work of cultivating discernment and, you're dealing with your religious programming, how do you find what's really right for you on this path? And for me, it comes down to just asking questions. If you've watched some of the interviews on my channel so far, you've probably noticed that there are people from wildly different perspectives on here, like completely opposite ends of the spiritual spectrum. And that's honestly by design. I really want to talk to people from different perspectives. My only basic criteria for each guest is just that the person needs to be aligned with good. They need to be aligned with the light, if you will. They need to be trying to do some good in the world and make the world a better place. That's really all I ask. I don't agree with every person that comes on my show, and I don't have the same experiences as every person on my show, but I welcome different types of perspectives and different types of beliefs because I believe in the value of having a safe and welcoming place for you and me and for anybody else who happens to find this content to find what resonates and what really rings true. And I want to show that it's okay to ask questions. As long as you're kind and respectful and the person is open to it, it's always okay. Asking questions is what helps you find perspectives and beliefs that are actually right for you. It helps you practice discernment. It helps you sniff out people who are trying to take advantage of you. And you should always be wary of anybody or any group who says you can't ask questions, especially in the spirituality space. That is a huge red flag. You should always be able to ask questions. And if a teacher or a guru or a group says it's not okay for you to be asking questions, you need to run as far as you can away from that group. It's probably not a safe space for you to be in. And aside from the danger element, obviously, like, asking questions is just fun. Like, it's a great way to explore and learn more and help you find your people and your community. Asking questions is kind of a requirement, I think. It's a major component, at the very least, of being a spiritual seeker. And it's a major part of knowing what's ultimately best for you. And the more you ask questions, the more you'll be able to find your own path, the more you'll be able to create your own thing. And personally, I think forging your own spiritual path is the best gift you can give yourself as a spiritual seeker, because no one else has the answers for you. No one else has ultimate truth. Other people have ideas. Maybe they have experiences you find interesting or inspiring. They might have some quote unquote medicine for you that can take a number of forms, whether it's teaching, energy healing, inspired art, writing, whatever. But at the end of the day, the truth that you're seeking, all of that good stuff, all the answers that you want, they're all inside of you. Everything else is just a mirror. And that's why I wanted to do this episode, because it's so easy to get derailed on this path by isolation, by the frauds, by the grifters, by our own trauma and our limiting beliefs and our religious programming, by blindly accepting other people's ideas and not asking the questions that we deeply want to ask. Being a spiritual seeker and creating your own path is about coming home to yourself. And in order to do that, you have to remove the brush and the sticks and the rocks blocking your path. And I didn't want this episode to discourage you. I didn't want this episode to make you feel fearful. My hope was that this episode would help you feel empowered and inspired and better equipped to navigate your spiritual awakening in your journey. Because for me, this journey has been the most fun thing I've ever done in my life. It's been so interesting, so enlightening. I've met so many great people along the way. And I think if this is the path that's meant for you, you should have all the tools that you need. This journey is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. And in order for it to be fun and enjoyable, you just have to do a little bit of work to clear the other stuff out of the way. Do a little bit of work first so you can actually enjoy it. highlyspiritualperson.com. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and the Wisdom app at Highly Spiritual Person. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share on whatever app you are joining me on today, and I will see you next week.